According to Greek mythology, Medusa was a beautiful maiden who was raped by the god Poseidon in a temple of the goddess Athena. Athena punished Medusa by turning her hair into snakes, and everybody that looked upon her was petrified and turned into stone. Theseus was a Greek hero, and he managed to trick Medusa by using a mirrored shield, and he could only see her reflection then, and then he decapitated her. Theseus used her decapitated head to petrify his enemies, and then he gave the head to Athena, who attached it to her shield or her aegis. The Gorgoneion, representation of the Gorgon face framed with the snakes, had the power to petrify an enemy. Gorgon blood was said to have both qualities that could harm or heal people. Now, holding up a mirror to reveal the snakes in our own heads can be so petrifying that most people avoid it at all costs. People are reluctant to face their own shadows. Now, Dr. Patric Gagne, in her 2024 autobiography, Sociopath, Memoirs, says, "As a child, while other kids in my neighborhood were riding bikes and having play dates as children with friends, I was reading mysteries, true crime mostly. I was fascinated by the darkness in people. What is it that makes them evil? What is it that makes them capable? I wanted to know." Patric presents the following bio of herself. She says, "I'm a criminal without a record. I'm a master of disguise. I have never been caught. I've rarely been sorry. I'm friendly. I'm responsible. I'm invisible. I bled right in. I'm a 21st century sociopath. And I've written this book because I am not alone." Dr. Patric Gagne has a doctorate's degree in psychology, and she's a very successful therapist. Of course, not all people who are fascinated by true crime are sociopaths. But why are people so fascinated with true crime? I'm often asked. Is it because they need to know more about it, because then they feel they can protect themselves from it happening to them? Has a fascination with true crime then become a modern Gorgoneion to ward off evil? Or is it because they can safely proclaim, "At least my little fantasies and indulgences are not as bad as those people"? These are rather superficial explanations. It begs the consideration, do they disappear down the rabbit's hole searching for a rabbit's foot or an amulet to protect them, that it doesn't happen to them, of becoming victims, or to prevent them from becoming perpetrators? My own interest in crime happened by accident, due to an interest in psychology, specifically, but not exclusively, the theories of Sigmund Freud, which led to my theory on the origins of serial killers, and there is another video about that. However, I think the answer in why people are so interested in true crime lies in the theories of Carl Gustav Jung, who was a contemporary of Freud. As the father of analytical psychology, one of Jung's most profound theories is that of the shadow. The shadow embodies those aspects of one's personality that people deny and they project onto others. Jung says, when an individual makes an attempt to see his shadow, he becomes aware of and often ashamed of those qualities and impulses he denies in himself, but he can plainly see in others. J'accuse. Some people have the ability not to take criticism from others very seriously. Others really struggle with it more than often, and they are very rejection sensitive, and they harbor resentment and revengeful thoughts. But those are all reactions to external criticism. What happens when the attack on the ego comes from an internal source, long suppressed into the abyss of the subconscious? Ignored for years, where it festers and it broods and it periodically breaks free from the dungeons to manifest in dreams, in fantasies, in secret indulgences, or in a morbid fascination with the dark side of humanity, safely sublimated and projected onto others. In psychology, sublimation is a defense mechanism that involves channeling unwanted or unaccepted urges into an admissible or productive outlet, such as writing or painting. J'accuse is an open letter written by Emile Zola and published on the 13th of January 1898, in the newspaper L'Aurore, in which he accuses the President of France, Félix Faure, and his government of anti-Semitism. J'accuse is one of the best-known newspaper articles in the world, and since then it has become a term for public denunciation in response of a perceived injustice. But what if the finger is pointing to the accused is pointing to the self? Jung says, unfortunately, there can be no doubt that man is, on the whole, less good than he examines himself to be. Everyone carries a shadow, and the less it is embodied in the individual's conscious life, the blacker and the denser it is. People can easily become voyeurs of the dark abyss of murder, yet they shy away and resist entering their own abyss, fearful of encountering their own Medusa. Jung says, to become conscious of it involves recognizing the dark aspects of the personality and present as present and real. The act is the essential condition of any self-knowledge, and it therefore, as a rule, meets with considerable resistance. Dr. Patric describes how she used to steal as a child. She confesses these transgressions to her mother. When asked by her mother if she was sorry about it, she said she was, but she admitted to herself that she was sorry she had to steal to stop fantasizing about violence, not because she'd hurt anyone. One day, as a girl, she stuck a pen into another girl's head. She felt that violence replaced the apathy that she felt with euphoria. Dr. Patric knew that hurting others could not be a long-term solution to relieving the apathy that she felt, and that acts of violence, although quite effective in reducing the urge against apathy, went against self-preservation. This is selfish behavior, regarded as typically sociopathic. The concern is only with self-preservation, not with insight into the suffering and the pain caused to others. Dr. Patric also realized she was more prone to violent fantasies after extended periods of being alone with herself. Now, to me, this makes sense when considering that serial killers should never be paroled after extended periods of solitary confinement or imprisonment. Like the Marquis de Sade or Moses Itolia, as I explained in a previous video, extended isolation will lead to excessive fantasies which they act out once they are released. Dr. Patric devised non-violent ways of releasing the urges, such as stealing, taking illegal joyrides, and silently stalking her adversaries. She felt proud that she was doing the right thing and expected her mother to praise her for it, especially when she resisted the urge to do the wrong thing. When her mother was not impressed, she was conditioned into believing lying was a better option in future. Dr. Patric was quite candid about being a sociopath and did not try to hide it. She tried dealing with it, making sense of it, and she turned to psychology. I remember very typical of some serial killers, like the psychopath Brandon Brunt, was that he adamantly was trying to convince me of what a good person he was. Usually, the ploy of many criminals is to try and convince others how good Christians they are. By holding up a good person persona, another one of Jung's theories, they try to deflect from the Gorgoneion staring at them in the mirror. I love to sing and to give sweets to children. I just want to make people happy, said Brandon Brunt to me, and he was convicted of 4 brutal murders. Dr. Patric also used to attend parties just to study people and to learn to mimic their behavior and their emotions. She says they were always charmed, not with me, but with my reflection of them. And she says she's invisible and she blends right in. People are often deceived by sociopaths and psychopaths because they believe what they want to, not what is staring them in the face. About evil, Dr. Patric writes, pop culture, primarily based on sensationalized composites and second-hand stories, repeatedly described sociopaths as evil and terrible people. They were said to have no conscience. They were said to have no soul. Everything I read indicated I was a sociopath, she said. And yet I knew I wasn't the monster the media described. And she's not. Dr. Patric realized she was often just as guilty of having a repetitive negative thoughts about sociopathy as the media and the people around her. Confronting her own shadow, she realized she needed to be more conscious of the way she perceived herself. It was the only way I could ever be able to reframe my adult identity. Now, Jung observes, with a little self-criticism, one can see through the shadow, so far as its nature is personal. But when it appears as an archetype, one encounters the same difficulties with anima and animus, the male and the female. In other words, it's quite often within the bounds of possibility for a man to recognize the relative evil of his nature. But it is a rare and shattering experience for him to gaze into the face of absolute evil. Whoever fights monsters should see to it that in the process he does not become a monster. And if you gaze long enough into the abyss will gaze back into you, wrote the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche. This was also, by the way, the title of Robert Ressler, the veteran FBI profiler's book. And it probably warns against encountering one's own Medusa in the abyss. Yet, as I've said on many numerous occasions, serial killers are not monsters, and to reduce them into comic book villains is dangerous, for it masks their absolute ordinariness and with a red superhero cloak, and they hide in plain sight. Sports fans often watch experts re-examine the game on television. Now, armchair post-mortem analysis of a game does not change its outcome, and neither will superficial discussion of true crime change the outcome. But crime is not a game. Crime and murder are committed by real people, and death is not staged. Is it possible to replace a morbid fascination with a synthetic sensationalism often attached to true crime, with a more academic, sincere, scientific understanding of the phenomenon? Could that perhaps lead to a preemptive proaction rather than a morbid reaction? Jung says a man likes to believe he is the master of his soul, but as long as he is unable to control his moods and his emotions, or to be conscious of the myriad secret ways in which the unconscious factors insinuate themselves in his arrangements and his decisions, he's certainly not his own master. Confronting Medusa in one's own subconscious, facing and admitting to treachery, ability to deceive, and aggressive or even murderous impulses, does not mean one has the right to act out on them. Being aware of them means one can curtail them. Dr. Patric says, darkness is where you least expect it. But darkness and light form a balanced ecosystem. It's a yin and a yang, forming a whole. Dr. Patric turned from her childhood fascination from true crime to become an adult, studying psychology and to find real answers, not rabbit's feet, and subsequently, she makes a most valuable contribution to society. She turned pathos into ethos, a cohesion of society, rather than the destruction thereof. Imagine if more people can follow her courageous example. Like yin and yang, the shadow also embodies the suppressed positive, not just the negative. Medusa was a beautiful woman, and Gorgon blood has the power to harm, but also to heal. Many people tend to underplay their goodness and only focus on their badness or their insecurities. Dr. Patric writes in bold capitals in her book, "Attention all sociopaths and antisocial outliers. Don't panic. Don't hurt anyone. You are not alone. You aren't crazy." And she became a therapist and a trauma counselor for victims of violence. Kudos to her. Jung says the shadow can be black and dense. I am not the only one who has entered the dense black shadows of serial killers, and my own shadow in the process. I have many colleagues and profilers and psychologists and criminals and detectives. We emerged not unscathed from the darkness, and often suffered post-traumatic stress and burnout. But I wonder if, according to the yin and the yang principle, if the density of the darkness we encountered can match the brightness of the light we shine into the abyss, can it be with an equal intensity? Therefore, if we stand together we shine not one little candle that can burn out, but rather we form a strong lighthouse that shines so much deeper into the blackness of the abyss. If we as individuals can have the courage to explore our own shadows, facing the reflections of our own Medusa, instead of being self-righteously denialists, projecting our own shortcomings onto others, can we also then, as a society, take responsibility for breeding serial killers? And I literally mean breeding them, for they are not spawned by aliens. They are born and bred from parents. Children are raised by societies. Can people so fascinated by true crime, a literary or a movie genre, make a difference in real life? If you like these videos, please subscribe and give us your thumbs up. And if you want to learn more about criminal psychology and forensic psychology, then please join my Patreon community by clicking on the link in the description and subscribe to Patreon. Thank you.